FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. It's 10/15/19. Well, hey, elections coming up in Canada. We've got 2 main party candidates that everyone seems to despise. We got a few independent parties that could well hold the balance. We're going to be talking with Danielle Park about that, getting some insight into Canadian politics. It really is important to the U.S., considering that Canada is a resource-based economy, largest trading partner of the United States, and our neighbor to the north. Well, make sure you go over and check out Danielle's site, jugglingdynamite.com. Questions or comments for Danielle, myself? Where do you think the elections in Canada are going to wind up? I think the election is coming up October 21st on a Monday. So make sure all of my Canadian followers, listeners to FSN are out there voting, if that's what you want to do. If you haven't given up on it yet, on the process. Anyway, Danielle, welcome back. So you have already voted, and I'm just reminded when we were talking about the situation in Canada, the situation is always hopeless but never serious. That's what my former partner used to tell me, and I've kept it. Sometimes it's the only thing that has kept me sane at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, keeping things in perspective. But I do think, we're at a tipping point in many ways. And we have just one tipping point, for example, is that there are now more 18 to 24-year-olds in Canada eligible to vote than there are baby boomers. So just that demographic shift in itself, if the young vote decided to come out and wanted to vote against the status quo, they would literally have the power to tip things quite significantly. Now, of course, when you look at recent polls, 70% of conservatives plan to vote, and roughly the same amount for liberals, a little less. But also in that age group, in the over 50 age group, that's where you get the 70% plus intention to come out and vote. And sometimes in the younger groups, of course, it's much less. But if the younger people decide that they want to have impact or they want to tip the balance in some way, they certainly have in their power to do so. So, that's something that I don't think we should take lightly in a democracy. I think that we all like to complain. We all like to criticize the powers that be. And my complaint would be that whether you're talking about Canada or you're talking about the U.S., basically liberals and conservatives, whether they're Democrats or Republicans or liberals or conservatives in Canada, they're ultimately all sort of the parties of corporate control today. And I think that's a negative thing, not because I'm anti-corporation. I'm not. I'm anti-unequal and unfair policies that enrich a certain sector at the expense of everything else. And I think that when that gets to such an extreme as it is today, it is very devastating for the overall economy and devastating for the workforce and for progress, for innovation, for investment, for R&D. What the status quo wants to do is keep you on where they're collecting the highest rents right now, and they don't have a natural inclination to move on to the next iteration of whatever, and change is essential. We either swim forward or we drown, that's for sure. So I think that's the issue right now with elections all over the world is to what extent are the main contending parties representing a status quo which is no longer affordable.
Mm-hmm. Well, if you look at voter participation rates, they've gone up a little bit recently. It's hard to know exactly, and it's different in different areas. But the younger folk, that younger generation, what we would refer to as the millennials, although they're older millennials in their 30s, but that 18 to 24 group is historically like the lowest participation group. And in some ways, maybe that's a good thing because maybe they don't really have the maturity to have insight into the issues. Maybe they need a little bit of maturity, and that's why they don't vote, because they don't have it. They're kind of been out of control a lot in the States here. And, they're just...
Which group's out of control?
I'm talking about that 18 to 24 group. They feel like things are kind of hopeless, that the American dream has eluded them, and they're stuck with, tens of thousands of dollars of school debt and no hope for the future. But historically, that 18 to 24 group or 18 to 29 has always been the lowest participation rate in any election. And, even for Obama, who was really the hope of the millennials, the participation was higher. But once his second term hit, it went back to its historic levels.
Yeah, well, the young people have to see something in it for them, right? And I think that if you look at tipping points in history, whether you have affect a tipping point through an election or through a revolution or through a war, ultimately young people have a lot to say in the outcome that goes on. So I think that, I encourage young people to not give up hope. I think that they have reason to be angry with old people who don't want to change and evolve. And I try very hard not to be one of those in my peer group. I think that there are some very obvious themes all over the world. Like I said, the status quo is these sort of mature businesses that have run their course. In Canada, it's clearly the fossil fuel industry, which has huge clout politically and has huge incentive to keep things exactly the way they are. Now, in the context of that, the reality is most new jobs are created from small and startup companies, and a lot of them are seeing enormous opportunity in many of the new technologies and the infrastructure platforms that need to be built all over the world. So there is a whole bunch of people that are working every day on really exciting, business stimulating, job growth rich areas. But they have so far been basically subdued or thwarted by a status quo political system. So to what extent that gets, my sort of hope for this election in Canada, and certainly the polls right now are suggesting that Liberals and Conservatives are both kind of neck and neck and neither one has a majority. And I think possibly the best outcome we can get is for a coalition of NDP, which is the more socialist group in Canada, as well as the Green Party, which has been gaining momentum all over the world in different countries. They are both looking to gain significantly more seats, not anywhere near a majority or even a minority government, of course, but just having that coalition and greater representation in our government is likely to cause more conversation and negotiation and give the politicians more leeway to say, hey, I can't just appease these one or two groups that have traditionally had the bulk of our ear. We have to find some kind of mediated solution here. And so I think that's probably the best outcome we can expect in Canada, and indeed maybe all over the world right now, because it's not as if, pure socialism has all the answers, but it's certainly not as if pure corporatocracy has all the answers. And somehow we have to make our way to a more moderate and reasonable approach.
Yeah, well, certainly it's not the corporatocracy, because, in the long run, none of us has done well by them. They've really kind of screwed us over. But, it's a long slog, whatever we're going through now. And I'm not sure that anyone has the answers to it. But the problem is that the divisiveness, like in your country, it's going to be much harder to govern than it is now, regardless who wins, because they're going to have to
I think democracy should be messy. It should be outspoken. It should have all age groups engaged. It shouldn't be easy and calm, because when it's easy and calm, people fall asleep and bad stuff happens. And that's the reality. Whenever it seems like, whenever we're in an expansion and everyone's sort of adding to their debt and getting jobs, they tend to be more complacent with whatever's going on behind the scenes. When you get into a period where you have a lot of financial stress, when companies are doing things like freezing pensions and workers are being laid off, these are the things that sort of rouse them out of their slumber, and they say, hey, wait a minute. Now we're at the end of a 10-year expansion, and I actually don't have anything much to show for it except more debt and more stress and more gray hair. And young people indeed rightly point out that in the last decade, they've not really made any measurable progress, many of them, because they've been either cut out of the workforce or held in low-paying jobs. There hasn't been upward mobility like there has been in past generations. Many of them have still been just living at home trying to pay off their debt. And so, that's a valid complaint about why the current system is not just, it's not serving a lot of groups, not just young people. There's a lot of groups that are noticing that, hey, I'm paying more and I'm getting less. I'm working hard and I have less actual net income or net worth to show for it. And those are the times when people do look for new answers. And, I think about FDR. I've read a couple of books recently, in the Depression in the United States and in England, and everyone's scurrying to try and figure out what to do. And, basically his model was to just try anything and everything new. And of course, you're going to make some bad decisions and things are going to not work. A good amount of the new ideas you try are not going to work. But we know the status quo has caused a lot of harm. So his motive, it's like when after in the 2001 recession, coming into the 2008 recession, when George W. was at the helm, he said, why he backed the bailout of the banks, that whole the TARP program and all that, was he said, if we're going into the next depression, I'm sure as hell going to be FDR and not Hoover, right? And his point was, I'm going to try everything I can think of if we need to shake up the status quo.
Yeah, well, I always said, and we talked about this numerous times, about like rescuing banks, like Deutsche Bank is no one, not Angela Merkel, not David Cameron, the Prime Minister of the UK, but not Trump.
The new one?
Yeah, the new one. I can't remember, but it doesn't really matter. No politician is going to want to be known in history as the person that brought down the system. And
Boris Johnson, that's his name, Boris Johnson.
Boris Johnson, right? No one wants to be known for that. And basically what the W enunciated was just a typical political thing, like much rather keep the system going, even with all its inefficiencies and corruptions, than actually fix something. Because if we really screw up and we throw the world into another massive depression, it's like history is going to be a harsh judge. Now, I never personally ascribe to that view because I think you need to do what's right and history be damned. But it is a typical sniveling, sneaky, cynical political view of things. And it's the prevalent view here.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next.
Otis Gold Corp is a gold development and exploration company with quality projects in the pro-mining state of Idaho. Otis's flagship Kilgore project has a resource of 961,000 gold ounces, and its recently published preliminary economic assessment demonstrated an impressive post-tax IRR of 53% at $1,500 gold. In addition to the significant expansion potential at Kilgore, Otis is exploring its highly prospective Oakley project. This Carlin-type gold deposit already has an inferred resource, and previous near-surface drilling intersected 123 meters of 0.69 grams per ton gold. Otis Gold Corp trades in New York under the ticker OGLDF and in Toronto under the ticker OOO. That's triple O. To learn more, go to otisgold.com. That's otisgold.com.
The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
So the IMF, if you noticed, came out with their report, their global report estimate. So they're now forecasting maybe a 3% growth rate for 2019 and only slightly better in 2020 globally. So that compares with, a 5.6% growth peak at the top of the credit bubble cycle when everyone thought China would have insatiable demand forever of the world's commodities and all that. That was the peak of that cycle. So we're about almost half the growth rate that we were at the top of that cycle. And that compares with 2008, which was the year before, of course, just as the recession was getting underway. And of course, global growth actually was slightly negative at the bottom of the recession in 2009. So it's just another on top of every other, global body has been warning that the economy is in a major synchronous slowdown globally, and that they don't have a lot of monetary room to work with. And we've got more debt than ever before. It's going to be harder for, monetary interventions here. And they all come to essentially the same conclusion, which is we've got huge inefficiencies and waste in our food and energy and transportation systems. And this is crossing at a time when technology has come rapidly forward in the last 20 years to a point where it can actually offer great help in improving a great deal of our system so that we waste less and benefit more, so that we don't have to constantly figure out how to afford more cost, but rather, get lower cost. And so the IMF recommended, infrastructure investment in innovative energy systems. And that's what so many bodies are coming to, is like, if the current regime has run out of steam, if we can't just keep bailing out banks and adding on debt, if more consumer consumption, just mindless consumption, is non-productive, which it is, we're seeing that in all the growth rates across the world, surely we need to do something revolutionary here. And a lot of countries are already doing it. And things like carbon tax, which people go crazy over carbon tax, is just a reflection of the actual cost of what you're doing when you get in a plane and fly from A to B, or when you choose to drive this vehicle over that vehicle. And, economies that are properly adapting to this stuff are actually starting to grow faster than the antiquated economies who continue to fight it. So we're just at, like I say, we're at a point where we can keep doing the same old stuff and expect the same old bad result, or we can really try some new ideas. And I think that's where the young energy comes in, because a lot of old people spend a lot of their time telling me why things can never change, or things will never get better, or it's hopeless. That's an old person's conversation. A young person or a progressive older person says, of course things change. They always change. Let's figure out how to make this better. And I think that is the group that always wins the day in the end.
Yeah, well, I mean, change is inevitable. That's the only constant in life. So if you're not ready for it, you need to be. I mean, I remember I was the first person on my block to have a PC, literally, going back to the 70s, when they were not so fashionable, and they were basically, you didn't know what to do with it. It was basically a big brick. And the problem is, when government invests in all these technologies rather than letting the market work it out, and granted, we don't have a free market, but government is usually wrong. Like, government is the accommodating loser. If we were at a racetrack and everybody's betting on horses and the bookie's looking for the worst client, he's always going to take government as the client, because the government, their incentives are skewed, and subsidies always inevitably lead to waste. So the point is, it's not just the corporatist system that has ceased to function. It's the welfare state, evidenced by all of the blight that we have across cities in the U.S. and the failure, the inability to govern and handle the most basic of problems like cleanliness, like sanitation. So we've got to rethink the entire thing. And the government that is going to have to pay for all this needs to be in a different place than it is now, at least in the Western world, because these governments have done untold harm, cost untold lives in their efforts to make things better, which should be the purpose of government in the first place. But nowadays,
government is just individuals, right? Humans. We're deeply flawed in any event. We're not perfect. We're flawed. But if it depends on your perspective, because if you're a single parent, if you're a person who's been on disability, if you're someone who's sick in Canada, government taxpayers, which is us, the taxpayers, actually provide an incredible amount of support in this country, which many countries do not have, and many countries do have. And so, you can never, my complaint with people is they cut things down, they criticize government, they criticize everyone, but it's actually an individual responsibility thing. If we are to be the change, then we must make those changes and lead it, instead of sit on the sidelines and cut everyone up.
Well, my point is this, that government often becomes the very problem that it seeks to solve. And as you said, it's made up of people. People are flawed. People are corrupt. And, just like...
And some aren't. A lot aren't. There's a lot of good people
but once
that
they
are
get
working
into
in the government, for example. that are very dedicated and very educated and very hardworking, and they do the right thing every day, and they're not bought and they're not corrupted.
Yeah.
So you can't make.
We need more of them. We need more of them because
there's lots of them. And it's interesting that you bring up the internet, Carrie, or computers, because we wouldn't have any of that if we hadn't had governments supporting initial innovation.
We hadn't had NASA. We wouldn't have had it maybe in the time frame and the way that it appeared. Probably it was inevitable, but I know it was due to NASA. We could go back and debate the whole thing. Sometimes, I'm not saying government is always wrong and always, but look, the internet is a offshoot of the military industrial complex, DARPANET. No one can deny that. So maybe it's the one positive thing that came from it, but it probably would have evolved in another way on its own, but we don't know because it evolved this way. And that's with a lot of technology was bound to occur, but you have to go back decades to see where it actually started evolving from. But
one I think classic statement we can probably both agree on is once it's obvious, it's over. So once something is, obvious to everyone that it's the latest, greatest thing, then it's probably already on the downside, and we're looking to another new innovation or development that everyone is sitting around going, will never happen. Oh, that's impossible. That's usually a good indicator that you're on the right track.
Yeah. Oh, totally. It's the things that are going on right now, nothing is going to look like it does now in 20 years for sure.
Even 10 from now, I swear it'll be a lot different than it is now.
It's different, but it is, the acceleration of change will be right. Maybe we'll all be driving flying cars. Maybe we'll all be driving electric cars, although I tend to think that's going to take longer than one would like or think, because there's an infrastructure that isn't there that needs to be there. But in any event, hey, if you're interested in these issues and others, then I suggest you take a look at Danielle's site, jugglingdynamite.com. Emails are appreciated, kl@kerrylutz.com, Twitter feed @KerryLutz, Facebook pages, Financial Survival Network. Danielle, we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. You be well.
Okay, Kerry.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.